Welcome back to Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast presented by Zwift, our show partner. Benji's been crushing it on Zwift recently. I've been tootling along. MVP himself, who is a big protagonist of E3 today, has also been, I think, doing his recovery rides post MSR on Zwift. But anyway, have the E3 Saxo Classic. I'm going to call this the E3 Price E3 Harelbecker. You're not allowed to change the name on me so much. And it is the mini Ronda on the Friday, and it was a classic. It lived up to the billing. We'll also have Catalunya afterwards. But is this a public holiday in Flanders, Benji? Like, what is the status of E3? Give us a little context to it.
Just a work day, but
really?
I would say,
why is everyone on the road then?
I don't know.
You got some economic growth problems. GDP could be boosted another 2% if you didn't have these on the weekdays.
I'm afraid so as well, but I will say it's got a pretty high name in the sense that it's probably, I think RVV is obviously the first one.
Yeah.
Then you've got the second one, which is probably Gent-Wevelgem.
Really? Above this?
And then the third one is probably Omlo because it's the start of the cobble season. And the fourth is probably E3.
Really?
How I would rate it. The way I see the hype in the public. But after today, there might be a bit more hype about E3 than in usual years, because in other years, it was a bit of less of an eventful day. But today,
well, Pog didn't do it last year. And did Matthew do it last year? I can't remember.
Nope.
We're obviously on first name terms. Anyway, he is here. The start list absolutely stacked. 205 Ks from Harelbecker to Harelbecker. We have a lot of the climbs you'll see in the Tour of Flanders, Oude Kwaremont, but the Paterberg is beforehand. I don't know if they do it in a different direction. They must. Sort of 2.1 Ks, 4%, with steeper cobble parts of it. It's really jagged, this profile, but the last Tiefenberg, which is not that hard to be honest, 800 meters, 5%, that crest with 20, no, can I do maths? 21 Ks to go to the finish. That's pretty far from the finish for the last climb, especially in a race that's an hour less in length, or maybe even more compared to Tour of Flanders. So it's a lot of climbs, but then the final is pretty much flat. And there was, I think, a tailwind in the final too. But yeah, we had Quickstep here. How would they go with Alaphilippe and Asgreen? Wout here with the full Jumbo-Visma complement. And the standard break went Benji. With Kel O'Brien, I guess the notable part.
Yeah, he was in the breakaway. There were a few other people in the breakaway, but let's be honest about it. I'm not going to go through the entire breakaway at E3 Prijs, Harelbeek, E3 Prijs, Saxo Classic, whatever it's called at the moment, because there's so much action that will unfold later, and the break is basically caught the first second that action happens in this race. Because, like, there were a lot of, like, punctures and crashes in the peloton before we get to, like, the part that matters, but everybody knows that this race is going to open up on the Tienberg. It happened 2 years ago when Quickstep launched it there and made a group where they had a numerical advantage. It happened last year where Jumbo-Visma did the exact same and also got a group with a numerical advantage ahead. Now today, I'm going to spoil it a little bit. It turned out a tiny bit different than the last 2 years, but the action was also great. And we're moving towards roughly 100k to go, 95k to go, 90k to go. We've gone over the Trieu, which is the Knokteberg, and nothing really happens there. Just a peloton getting a bit closer towards the breakaway. Gap is now roughly 1 minute, and we're moving towards 90 kilometers to go, where we've got the whole
pause there though.
At the whole
why are teams like EF pacing and got the whole team on the front, keeping the gap like a minute 30 to break at this point in the race?
I think on the Trieu and so forth, I didn't get it. Why were they pacing before every hill and so forth before we get to the most important factors? Does not make sense in my head. Positioning, but then again, it's not important yet. Positioning matters.
Take your lead from the big guns.
Yeah, exactly. There's no real point in it for me, I would guess. And you also make it easier for the other teams, the likes of Jumbo-Visma and the likes of Yoe, who were pacing behind the breakaway, to not have to pace as much as they initially would have. Then again, Affini was probably not going to survive multiple hills here, so I don't think it had too much effect that an EF was pacing, because half of their team would have been dropped on the first Tienberg. Anyway.
Rude.
No offense, but half the peloton would be dropped on.
Yeah, true. When Tienberg goes, it's like a complete explosion. Yeah.
Anyway, descent of the... Well, we're on the Hotond, and we're noticing that the Hotond is before the Kortekeer, which is like the moment where everybody wants to be at the front. And on the Hotond, everybody starts sprinting already, trying to the front, and Greg van Avermaet is dropping off the back. And that's because I think he's coming back from illness, which is unfortunate to see. And is a real bummer because he's in contract year. If he wants to continue cycling, then the classics are a big thing for him to prove himself. And with that illness and with the form that he currently showed today, I fear for that a bit. Anyway, the peloton dives down the descent of the Halton, and there we start seeing it, eh? Quickstep moving forward, Jumbo moving forward, every team with like the big guns moving forward, except one team, UAE. Where was Pogacar?
This is the problem. Well, Wellens had a flat, Bjerg dropped his chain, and also UAE, I mean, why are you using Wellens before Oliveira, before Bjerg? Now, maybe it's the end of March and the clock, I think, goes forward tonight. And I think that's his signal to, we'll see you in September. But what is Wellens doing at the front that early? I couldn't believe it. Like, what is the point of Bjerg if not to be up there with Ado, Feeney, and who else? Jonas Koch. So I think Albertson today, for the middle part of this race, tactical masterclass. Actually, they completely surprised Jumbo-Visma with an anticipation of Dries de Bont before really the action had kicked off, right? And no Jumbo-Visma reacts. And you now have someone for MVDP to bridge to. You now have an Alpecin rider ahead, Dries de Bont, who's pretty strong. And a lot of people were saying, there's been a lot of articles written, you know what Jumbo are going to do, use numbers, blah, 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 blah. Well, Alpecin got ahead of them.
Yep.
And then Jumbo are having to react. I mean, it ultimately didn't make too much of a difference, the ball move, but it was a start of a theme.
Yeah, I agree. And I also noticed in the run-in after the Kortekeer, so on the Kortekeer, the peloton kind of blocks it up, but then afterwards they start sprinting towards the Tyenberg while the Bond has bridged up towards the breakaway or the leftovers of it. And during that sprint towards the Tyenberg, I felt like it wasn't very organized from Jumbo either, where for at least 10 to 20 seconds, Wout van Aert was at the front, Laporte was riding next to him, Van Baarle was riding next to him, and on the right side you see Benoit moving up, on the left side you see Nathan van Hoorn moving up, so they're riding in the wind still, right?
Yeah, but you accept that. It's like, in Catalonia on stage one, Roglic, he launched way too early in the wind, but it was discussed, well, all the other riders, because Roglic moved up early from 3-4Ks, you're happy to do a little bit of work there, so when it really kicks off, you're in good position, where it's much worse, so that's sort of the price they're paying. But yeah, Jumbo looked fine. It was MVDP, Benji. Or
Alaphilippe? I feel like there was a move by Alaphilippe before. He made a move before the Tyenberg arrived with Van der Poel on his wheel.
Really?
While the peloton was entirely stretched out. A really confusing sight because I was like, why would you attack here, Alaphilippe? Why would you do something here? You're going to blow yourself up for the Tyenberg. And then the Tyenberg arrives and we see that Jumbo still pacing towards it, like we'd expect to happen because they have the strongest team to do this. But we see someone launching it.
Mathieu van der Poel, he's got Dries de Bont up the road, who's caught the breakaway and is sort of attacking the breakaway a little bit. And it's smart because you isolate Wout early, make it a brawl one-on-one, and you've got a pretty good chance of winning historically, rather than waiting to have Laporte attacking, Van Baarle attacking, Benoit attacking. Plus, you've got other options. You've got Søren Kragh who can be brought back behind. Now, if he goes clear there and gets to the Bont, there's big trouble. And this is why, people said, oh, how does the chemistry of Jumbo-Visma, is it affected by, look at Omloop and Kerner, it was so great and everything, how will Wout affect that? It's like, well, you need Wout there to be on Van der Poel's wheel. Because if he's not, and listen, Van Baarle, Benoit, Laporte are not going to be, if he's not, this race looks very different. And he rides negatively, Benji. Doesn't take a pull with Van der Poel at all.
Yeah.
That's a bit new.
Is it new or is it what he should do on paper? Because at this point in the race, he knows that the group behind includes more Jumbo riders. Now, Benoit has had a puncture at this very moment, so he's back in the shadow realm. But on paper, Van Baarle is behind. On paper, the likes of Van Hooydonk could be moving up, or Laporte could be moving up. I wasn't necessarily expecting Van Hooydonk in the position that he was, so props to Van Hooydonk for still being in the group behind. But who was also in that group behind? Tadej Pogacar, who was in the shadow realm before the Tyenberg started. Yeah. He was in P like 80, 90 before the Tyenberg started
He
moving up
also
all the
was
time,
struggling
mate.
with some of the wet corners. He went straight, nearly went into a house for some stroopwafels. And yeah, I don't know, maybe the tires or whatever. Definitely was put under a little bit of pressure on some wet cobbles later. But yeah, that's the thing. You need like Trenton Benji. I don't really. It was very much like Dwars Duel last year. He's
Yep.
behind. There may even be a couple of UAE in the group, but he starts to panic and fret, and he's eating a lot of wind early. And for someone who needs to be dropping people on the harder climbs later, so it was a brilliant move from Alpecin and MVDP, and unfortunately for them, Wout neutralized it, and then it all started to come back. I don't know if I've missed anything. People periodically bridged across, right? The group swelled, and then it all came back.
Yeah, exactly. But you would say that it's a strategy that somewhat worked for Van der Poel in the sense
For
that
sure.
I think we discussed in our Alpecin preview that a potential strategy for Van der Poel against a block of Jumbo would be attacking so early that he drops the Jumbo domestiques.
Yeah.
But then the question is, what is the follow up? And I guess we
And
see
then
today.
hopes Wout pulls with him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that didn't really work out. But we have a follow up that is not necessarily bad for him, I would try to say. Now, we see a group forming, and that group includes the likes of Søren Krandersen as well, next to the likes of Pogacar, Van der Poel, and so forth.
Van
So,
Baarle.
yeah, that group is entirely formed, but we see a move a bit later with like 68k to go. No clue what bloody climb it is because there's so many bloody climbs in Flanders that it exists. Anyway, it's a climb that exists. Asgreen does a move there, and it's like the kind of Asgreen move where he gets a bit of a gap and then he keeps spacing for a bit. And we see that in his wheel, it's a Jumbo rider, but not Wout van Aert. I'm pretty sure it was Laporte in his wheel.
Yeah.
And we've got Van der Poel following, Poggi at the back of his six-man group, and Van Aert is kind of on a gap for a second. And then Van Baarle has to close down the gap for Wout van Aert. Van Aert should have been on Van der Poel or Pogacar's wheel at that point, right?
Yeah, maybe you didn't expect Asgreen to attack. It's not the worst situation for Jumbo Visma, and they get back across, and I'm thinking they got three in the group. They got Laporte, Van Aert, and Van Baarle, I think it was. Moritz is always lurking. This is the phase of the race. Moritz is really trying to find an ally like a Stefan Kung to get ahead with, because he knows on the Paterberg he's not going to be able to go at the big guns. So this is really his time in the race. And I couldn't believe it. It comes back together. I'm looking at Dylan Van Baarle. I'm like, he's going to go. He's going to go. He doesn't. No one from Jumbo goes. And it's Alpecin again, beating Jumbo at their own game. With Søren Kragh, what a signing. Perfectly complements Van der Poel, actually, to the point where Van der Poel, I think, makes a few mistakes in the final here. He goes, and you see Van Aert on the radio saying someone needs to go with this. And it's Van Hooijdonk bridging across with, I think, Moritz, right?
Yeah. Where did Van Hooijdonk come from? Because I swear he was not in the group there until he was, and Laporte was suddenly gone. So it's like they teleported and switched places at that point in the race. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. Anyway, those three get a bit of a gap, and we've got a bit of a phase where it kind of calms down for 8 kilometers, where it's kind of like those three riders are ahead, and the group behind still has some people working, but not the likes of
not pulling.
Exactly. Van Hooijdonk is not pulling at the front. That's pretty important to mention. And why is he not pulling in that group? Because he probably says, okay, Moritz is in this group.
Because they'll cook him.
Probably. Especially with the likes of Paterberg still coming out, of Quadamon still coming and so forth. But Quickstep basically has riders come back to that second group. Lampard, for example. So more riders in that group now. And Lampard has to pace for Asgreen. Clock starts pacing for Ganna, I guess. And 58 kilometers to go, we enter the Stationsberg. And that's where two things happen. First of all, a crash of Van Baarle, which puts Jumbo in a different position. They still have Van Hooijdonk at the front and still Van Aert in the second group. They've got a rider less to do stuff with Wout van Aert or to anticipate later on if Van Hooijdonk gets caught. But at that same moment, we've got a vicious attack on the left side of the road, huh?
Yeah, Van der Poel goes again. He's trying to get across to Søren Kragh. Pogacar bridges across. Van Aert closes, and the motorbikes bring them across very nicely. And this is the race. But before we get into that, we'll mention the Zwift Hub, the best priced direct driver or any trainer on the market. It's been so good to hear your feedback, getting the Zwift Hub, how it compares to other trainers at just a crazy price point, half the price or less of other trainers on the market. So if you are in the market for one, or you want to jump in and jump onto Zwift, the perfect companion is the easy to set up Zwift Hub. So here's the race, here's the situation. Søren Kragh, Van der Poel, 2 Alpecin. Moric, Pog, 2 Slovenians with 2 different goals. Bahrain, UAE isolated. Van Hooijdonk, Van Aert, Jumbo-Visma. Behind, Van Baarle's crashed out. Laporte doesn't look good. Benoit's nowhere. Tosh van der Sande is back in the group behind. We have FDJ with numbers in the group behind. Movistar with numbers. Ineos with a few numbers. But they're really far behind. Alpecin, really, these are their 2 guys. They don't really have too much behind either. This is a really good situation for Alpecin because they have 2 of the strongest 4 in the group in Søren Kragh and Van der Poel, because I've had Søren Kragh above Moric and above Van Hooijdonk, which is important because theoretically, getting into thinking about the end game, if SKA attacks and Van Hooijdonk can't close, it means Van Aert has to close with Van der Poel in the wheel. So I was seeing Jumbo work with this. I guess everyone was sharing it equally, but it was a better situation for Alpecin. Alpecin pre-race would have been very, very happy with this move.
I think so as well, but I want to throw the question for a second. Van der Poel attacked on the Stationsberg, bridging to a group with Søren Kragh Andersen, Mohoric, and Van Hooijdonk. If we say Søren Kragh Andersen was potentially the strongest of those 3, why did Van der Poel close that down if there was a chance that Søren Kragh Andersen could have gotten out of that?
And that's a continuation of when these moves go later from the big guns and SKA is trying to bridge back, why is Van der Poel pulling when Søren Kragh can come back and help him? And I think that's either inexperience or huge confidence or wanting to test himself head-to-head against Wout. I think it was a mistake, though. You're right. Like, just wait for someone to blink. Who's going to blink? Poggy. Poggy will blink. He's not in the front group. He has to go across. Let him bridge you across. So, in that sense, you're right. Like, maybe he was trying to get across to a satellite rider, but yeah. I think it was just, he's not used to having teammates. They're not used to racing like this.
Exactly. And you're going to have the other twin your wheel if you bridge towards those satellite riders. So, in the end, we create that situation, that group, and we're moving further into the race where we know the next spot is the Paterberg de Quaremont combo, the famous combo. Usually it's the other way around in RVV. Flanders, yes, it is. But here it's Paterberg first and then Oude Quaremont 4 kilometers later. And we know what's coming, eh? We know who's going to attack on the steepest bloody hill in this one. Is it the steepest hill? One of the steepest hills in this race. We know who of the 3 favorites is willing to attack there. It's Tadej Pogacar, but it's not the brutal attack because it's also Paterberg in RVV has this like barrier set up so you can't ride in the gutter. Paterberg in E3 has no barrier set up and there's a gutter free to ride to the top. Well,
who did it suit more?
The climb more.
Like the difference there that you just mentioned. Does that suit the cyclocrossers more or Pog?
Well, I'd say it's kind of technique-wise to fit in the gutter and stay in the gutter. Like Van Hooijdonk had issues with it. Where it was like, wobbly and bouncy about it.
And Van der Poel went straight in it.
Yeah, Pogacar as well, to be honest. And I feel like his technique is relatively good as well. So I would say it wasn't a real negative either for Pogacar there. I think in general, it might have stopped him from an all-out attack. But it's also not the climb where you can attack out of the saddle properly, eh?
And Poggy also always attacks from the front. He starts from the base, he winds it up, and he just does a really long effort trying to grind the others off his wheel rather than a short, sharp, like, sprint. And we see Van Aert is struggling. Søren Kragh and Van Hooijdonk are dropped. Moric is dropped, but he comes back on the descent. Søren Kragh and Van Hooijdonk work together, even though the 3 are pulling in front a little bit, which is where, if I was Van Aert, I both thought Van der Poel and Van Aert should have let their domestiques come back at this point. Firstly for Alpecin, because Søren Kragh was stronger than Van Hooijdonk. So And then for Wout as well, just having another teammate to help, maybe theoretically.
Close down, Kragh Andersen attacks.
Yeah, that lead out. Just, Mohoric anticipates, I think, let him come back. They do return, and Alder Quadramont. The last really hard climb, 39 Ks to go. Pogacar attacks. And we already saw on the Paterberg, the camera didn't show it, but you can see Wout was off the wheel at the end of the Paterberg. If you go and look back, and Pogacar goes on the Quadramont, drops Wout, who seems to be doing he's just doing it to power, actually, on the Quadramont. And when they get over the flatter section, he comes back a bit. Van der Poel, this is what Pogacar and Van der Poel normally do. Pog, they're a team against Wout. Pog smash steep. They get to the crest. Van der Poel comes to the front and starts pulling to extend the gap to Wout. That's the plan, but it didn't work out.
I would say it looked a bit more difficult for Wout than it did for the first two. If this is after 230 kilometers in a race, I might actually see Wout getting in more trouble here than he was today. He was on that gap a tiny bit, but I'm not sure if that was because he was dropping or that was because he slipped with his back wheel for a second, getting out of the gutter.
He got dropped on Quadramont. 100% dropped.
Okay. 100% dropped. He was gone to the Shadow Realm, and then he returns with his Uno reverse card and is back in the 3-man group. But then another attack comes. Pogacar goes again on the second part of the Oude Quadramont, does the exact same thing, and the gap's starting to open up a tiny bit, but then a motorbike crashes ahead of Pogacar, and I don't think that motorbike crashing saved Wout van Aert here, but there were 6 motorbikes in front of this 3-man group a lot of the time. No point in that being there. And well, if you got many motorbikes, then there's more chance of one hitting the deck. That's my fact of the day.
We should say in the group behind, there was turner pacing, there was various counter moves. I'm sure where exactly it happened, but at some point, a group of Kung, even Garcia Cortina and Jorgensen go clear. They're joined, I think, by Madouas had been pacing. They were with Ganna, and then those 3 go clear with Mohoric, I think, from that group. But that's after the second Quadramont. That group was so far behind with us because the motorbikes, the 3 in front, were working well. So we get over the last Quadramont. Van Aert immediately starts relaying with them. He's working, doing a bit more than Pog even on these flatter roads. We only have the Tegenberg, however you say it, left. It's not that hard. And so the group's working really well. We've got, unless there's some distancing on the last climb, which isn't that hard, a sprint coming, which I think is a tailwind. Pog didn't really go all in or try to attack on the Tegenberg, Benji. He really didn't. They just relayed. He didn't try.
Exactly. Now, there's something that you might not know because you're an Australian, so you don't mingle with the Benelux traditions of E3 Harelbeke. But the Tegenberg is a legendary climb because at the top, if you come over it first, you win bathroom furniture. And I'm pretty sure that Wout van Aert knew that because he went to the front 10 meters before the line of that bathroom furniture prize and he took it home. I don't know who wants bathroom furniture, but clearly someone in his family needs it because otherwise Wout van Aert would not speed up to get that on the line there. That might cost him at the finish line.
When I saw it, I was like, what is he doing? Because it wasn't a full-blown attack. Anyway, they get over it. The group behind, as I mentioned, they're not coming back. And we're now into the end game with the 3. This is exactly what we all wanted to see. The organisers, etc. Jumbo-Visma haven't been able to, as a team, sort of assert their superiority. They're having to rely on Van Aert to win. Van der Poel is looking menacing. Pogacar, though, seems to realise at a certain point, oh shit, I actually can't win a sprint against these 2. You could almost see that thought process happening, and he starts to pull, literally throwing off, and the other 2 big guys are pulling, and he's like, how's he going to play this end game? Because he wants 3rd. He doesn't want RVV to happen like last year, and there's the group closing behind with Kung and the 2 Movistar guys and Mohoric. But yeah, I mean, what can Pog even do in this situation?
On one end, you could say, Poggy has had good small group sprints in the past. He could save it all for the sprint, but that's a risky one. Because on paper, I would argue that an MVDP would definitely beat him. in a 3-up sprint. And in Wout van Aert, that's a close one because he's lost actually sprints to Pogacar before after Olympics, which was a bit of a different race, to be honest, because Wout did a lot of work there in the final.
And he let it out.
Exactly. Now, the other option is attacking, but if you attack, you got to go all out for that attack, and you got to have the benefit that Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel need to look at each other after that. Because that's something that has happened in the past. You can look 3 years ago or 2 years ago. I don't know what year it was, but Pedersen going in the move and Van der Poel and Wout van Aert just staring at each other behind. Well, Pedersen ends up winning that race in a sprint against someone that was not Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert in that race. And that's I think the thing that Poggi needed in an attack that did not happen. Because 3.4 kilometers to go, Pogacar attacks, Wout van Aert closes it. And when that happens, you know that, okay, they're not looking at each other here. We go towards 1.2 kilometers to go. Pogacar attacks again, and Van der Poel closes.
Yep.
So he's attacked twice. He spent energy for the sprint that comes in 1.2 kilometers in those attacks. And the other two did not look at each other. So they were fast on the wheel. So they did not spend as much energy as Poggi, right?
No way. And also, they're just happy to go for the sprint. Definitely Van Aert was happy to go for the sprint. And Poggi didn't know what he wanted to do, I think, in this race. He couldn't really figure out, like, I'll do this, and then, it's not working. Oh, shit, I can't win my sprint. And really what he needs to do is let the wheel go when you're in the 3. Let Van Aert go up the road a little bit, force Van der Poel to close it, let the wheel go of Van der Poel, start to really create a situation, use them as your teammate.
Yeah, and next to that, it didn't help Pogacar that he came into a situation very similar to the Ronde van Vlaanderen last year, where the group behind was getting closer, right?
Was coming,
a minute to 45 seconds, to 40 seconds, 35 seconds. It didn't get much closer than that, but I feel like it was enough to get Pogacar to keep on pacing a tiny bit after his attack. Then he started flicking his elbow vigorously. But if you just attack, the others are going to be like, mate, why would we do that? But I also feel like Van Aert was sitting on more than the other two in these last 5 kilometers. I have to be honest, I think that was very noticeable here.
Yeah, I think so. He was waiting for the sprint. He lubed up his chain from the car as well. They did a chain lube after, I think, a wet cobbled section. And curiously, and this is where it's different to the Olympics, Pogacar leads out the sprint with, I think, a bit of a tailwind from a decent speed. They were not track standing like in Flanders, and maybe that is the history of that last year. He leads it out, and that means 0 chance of winning. 0. Especially in a 200-kilometer race. Van der Poel comes out, Wout triggers the same time as Van der Poel, and Van Aert wins the sprint comfortably, actually, by at least, Van der Poel stopped, but he came over the top of Van der Poel, winning with Van der Poel 2nd, Pogacar 3rd, Jorgensen solo 4th, Garcia Cortina 5th. That's the 400 UCI points for Movistar. And to be honest, 2 in the top 5 for Movistar at E3, that is a good result. Doesn't matter that they weren't in the hunt for the win. That's a good result. Kung, Moritz, Madouas, Kranderson, Gunnar was very strong in parts, 10th. And yeah, I mean, this is Van Aert lost Tour of Flanders sprint by a photo. Like, it's not a huge surprise that he can win a higher speed sprint, and I think the Pogacar lead-out really played into his hands.
I think so as well. The slower the sprint is, the more I would lean towards the Van der Poel. The shorter the sprint is, the more I would also lean towards the Van der Poel. But I did feel like Wout van Aert was in the perfect position in the wheel of Van der Poel, so because Pogacar was going to get overtaken by Van der Poel instantly in that sprint, is how I saw it. And then those two are in the wind while Van Aert can a tiny bit use the wheel of Van der Poel and then launch it past him in the end. And I was like, is Van der Poel going to come back when Wout van Aert went over him? But that did not happen. And Van Aert wins this and was a strong performance this entire race. Now, would you say this race would have ended differently if it was 250 kilometers? Would Wout van Aert have dropped properly if there was another Pater Bergouaremont there?
I think it's, first of all, the Paterberg is after the Kwaremont, whether that changes anything. So does Poggi... it goes Oude Paardenburg, Koppenberg. So whether that sequencing suits Pogacar more to soften them up on Quamont and then get separation on Paardenburg, I think it does. There's also
Yeah.
the extra hour. So does the 3 meter, 4 meter, 5 meter gap turn into a 10 meter, 15 meter, 10 second gap? Where, I mean, even if he's dropped by like 5-7 seconds, he has a really good chance of coming back afterwards, because the other two have to work full gas the whole time. Maybe they will, and he has to really crack completely. And so if he just doesn't crack completely and disintegrate and still has something for the flat afterwards, it's going to be really hard, even in Flanders. It's also his sprint. Maybe his sprint is less after another hour. We don't know. I don't think this is exactly how Jumbo intended to draw up today's stage. I think Alpecin were the aggressors. But they got the dub. And Van Aert definitely in places of the race was more passive. Certainly when Van der Poel attacked after Tijnberg.
I think one thing that is notable, though, is that the dominance of Omloop and Kuhne from Jumbo-Visma is kind of irrelevant in races like this, where a Van Aert and a Pogacar can open it up so early to the point that they can bring Jumbo to a position where it's mano a mano between the big guns. And then it's down to Van Aert, and he did it mano a mano today, which is something that last year I feel like he failed to do in certain races, and the year before and so forth. But this time around, he properly delivered that right here against the two other bests, and that's promising for RVV and probably for his confidence as well. Now, do we put any more attention on chain gate, hashtag chain loop gate?
It's not allowed, is it, to lube the chain in motion from the car?
Exactly. On paper, it's a disqualification according to rules, plus like 500 Swiss francs or something. But it would be a real shame for this race, how amazing this race was, to have that rule applied here and have him out of the race. That being said, if the rule should be applied consistently, he should be disqualified. I'm just like, why is this rule existing? Because last year, Lampard did it in Roubaix, and he finished well. Then he got spectator crash him out, but that was disconnected from the loop being put on his chain. But it happens probably so much behind the scenes, the loop being put on a chain by a mechanic throughout the window. Like, why does this rule exist? Is it safety for mechanics?
I mean, the mechanic looks kind of like it could fall out. I don't know. It looks pretty dangerous. Well, does it make a difference in the final? Maybe, but I would, now that he's done it, and maybe the rule has been sort of dragged up to light, I think it'd be risky to do it in Flanders. So maybe get warned before. I don't know. Maybe the commissaires will give him a fine and a UCI point docking. They're not going to change the result.
The UCI, according to Sporza, actually said, "Oh, we'll allow it." I don't know if they said we've allowed it or will allow it. I don't know if they allowed it before he did it or after he did it, because that's like a curious difference, right? If they allow it after he did it, they're like, okay, well, this rule, fuck it.
Yeah.
If they allowed it beforehand, they might have asked, and then it's different, you know?
What does this mean for Tour of Flanders?
What does this race mean for Tour of Flanders? I think, first of all, just a confirmation that the dominance of Jumbo of the opening weekend doesn't mean that they will dominate the RVV and Roubaix instantly. In Roubaix, I think that might matter more than in an RVV. But in RVV, I feel like it's probably going to be mano a mano again. It's going to be difficult for RVV to be as legendary as his E3 was, I would say, where it ends up with the three greatest at the end. I hope so, but we've had so many moments in the past where we look forward to something like that happening, and then one has a puncture or a crash early on, and then it's ruined. So I sincerely hope it once again happens, where we've got a similar fight on the hands, and where we can see them mano a mano on the final climbs there. What else does it mean that Søren Kragh Andersen is good outside of MSR this year, which is a difference from last year, I would argue. It's a win, right, for Alpecin?
Yeah, and MVDP should trust him a little bit more, I think. He was very aggressive early. The crash of Dylan van Baarle is very important. How he comes out of that for Flanders, I think he is a key rider for Jumbo, and I think you really do want the pressure of Van Baarle from behind. If you have the three big guns ahead, I think you want the pressure of Van Baarle from behind. So I don't know how injured he is. It looked like a hard crash. But Laporte seems a little bit off. Like he he wasn't very good today. I don't know what happened. Bernard had the mechanical, whatever. Quick Step, awful. Frankly, Lampard was their best at 16th. Asgren attacked on Starshensberg, I think, and then dropped himself. So why is Asgren making the race? It's not his place, man.
I agree. He should be a following rider like the way Mohoric is racing. Yeah. Asgren should be racing.
Yeah.
And I feel like Quickstep often has in the classics this feeling of, oh, we need to control the race, like in the days where we were actually a prominent top team in these classics. Okay, you said it in a more clear way than I did.
Well, they're not good in the classics.
I feel that like they did play more of a role than I expected them to today. Alaphilippe was gone pretty quickly, but then again, the dude attacked before the time bet, which is fucking stupid. And when it comes to Lampard and Asgreen, I feel like rode a good race in terms of strength.
Physically, he looked better.
But should play the Mohoric role.
Yeah. There is no way that even Garcia Cortina, who I like as a rider, but physically, he's not better than Asgreen here. And he's come 5th. Yeah. And I think there's a reason he's come 5th, because he sat in the wheels, he bided his time, waited until he deep in the race. So Asgreen looks good, but him attacking with 2 hours left, or an hour and 45 left, with Van der Poel and Wout in the wheel, is not a good idea, because you're not better than them.
I do think he needs to attack early to be able to get into the final with the best, but I think Asgreen has this thing where he won RVV, and he might be slightly marked as a consequence of that.
Yeah, he can't do exactly what Mohoric is allowed to do.
But on paper, he's like, why is that? Why is that? Because Mohoric can do exactly what Asgreen can do when they ride away.
Because they dropped Mohoric on Paterberg, so they're not worried about him. Okay. They're like, you can come with us, we'll bridge across to you, because when it really comes down to it, we will drop you on Paterberg. Asgreen, they're like, well, in 2021, Van der Poel didn't, so that's why.
Yeah, I get that. Now, Movistar, you said 2 hours in the top 10, great performance, but that's actually great performance in total. Like, remember the days where Movistar had like Oliveira in the break, or Johan Jacobs in the break, or Amador in like the breakaway, or Iman Olerviti every single time? Those days are gone. Jorgensen is an actual competitor here, really versatile rider as well, with the way he climbs and average TT at the moment, but that could become better if he goes to a team that actually can TT well.
Yeah. I mean, 4th here after 5th in the Pyrenees Stage 8 after winning Tour of Oman. It's really, really impressive, Jorgensen. And it's not just one lucky counter from the wheels. He also anticipated earlier in the race, in between the Tyenberg and somewhere else. He was aggressive all day. Really, really impressive from Jorgensen, and Garcia Cortina was sort of more of a follower. Poor old FDJ, I think, had a race to forget too. They had strong riders. They just always seemed to be on the back foot. Instead of having Madouas anticipating with Mohoric, Van Hooydonk, Søren Kragh, they were sitting passive. And Lagac did have a mechanical, I think, or a crash, but still, I think a race to forget for them. And Ineos, honestly, turning back from injury, Ganna trying it out, I think reasonably positive, actually. Ganna mixing it up in Group 2, could it have been a little bit different? You know, Pidcock's not here, and I think Ineos was fine.
Yeah, I think it will matter more in the likes of Roubaix and so forth.
Yeah.
Where it's more flat, it's more likely that he's going to be able to worm himself in a position where he can do something from, while on the climbs, he might not be able to handle the repetitive climbing of every single hill with the best, but also not the massive explosion acceleration that happened on the Tyenberg, where he might not have been in the first positions in the first place. If he was there, he might have actually made the group, but then again, I don't think he would have. Now, there's actually come some footage out of the motorbike that crashed on the Oude Quademont, and actually, it actually hit a few spectators, so I hope those people are actually all right. So that's, it were like 3-4 motorbikes riding in front of the group, so in my opinion, there should not be 4 motorbikes in front of that group at that moment in the race. Enough to get the footage and so forth. There's probably a camera person, photographer on the motorbike, I'm guessing, or what else do you have them at that point? Vips is too late, right? There shouldn't be Vips at that point on a motorbike.
No. I hope that person's okay. It looked pretty scary, actually, watching that footage. I'm just going through the other teams just ahead of Tour of Flanders. Jayco, no one. Trek with Pedersen, 14th. They couldn't really get into the race. Sturven, 7 minutes back. When it really got going, they weren't there. As well as Lotto without DeLee looked a bit toothless.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to Binny. He DNF'd. They really weren't in the race into Marche either. So, yeah, other teams, not their best day. I would love to see Pog on a team that puts him in good position, but I don't think we'll see that by next Sunday.
Yeah. You think? What? Wait, what? Repeat?
We're not going to see people putting Pog in good position by next Sunday. He's going to have to do it all himself again.
I feel like when it comes to RVV, it's different where we kind of have the race opening up early on, like I think the Molenberg is one of the earlier climbs in there. But when we look at the last few Quaremons and Paterberg combos, we see that the run-in towards the outer Quaremont, while it narrows out a tiny bit, when they go like to the right at a certain point, it narrows into a certain street where people want to be at the front. Last year, he was in the right position, right? Going into the outer Quaremont?
He was in pretty good position. Yeah, he was. So yeah, maybe he will be okay. Today looked a lot like Dwars last year. But let us know. Van Aert was pumped after the finish. He wins a sprint ahead of MVDP. I think he really needed that as a confidence boost. Now, does that mean he should start pulling with Van der Poel in the wheel all the time next Sunday? No, I don't think so. I think he knows that the Paterberg and Claremont is the danger zones for him. Hopefully Van Baal's okay from their perspective and anyone else that crashed in E3, but what a delightful appetizer for next Sunday. It's almost like it can't be better than that, you know? Like, I feel like you can't have too many presents at once, but it was fantastic. So, yeah, great edition of E3. Definitely worth rewatching from 85Ks to go, 87Ks to go. Frankly, worth putting it on.